Welcome to my learning design project. The learning activity is how to ride a bike and will include learners from early childhood, ages 4 to 6, and late adulthood, ages 60 to 80. The learning activity will take place over the course of 2 days, and the learning environments will be the front yard of my home with parental supervision for early childhood and a nearby public park for late adulthood. By the end of the learning experience, the learner will be able to demonstrate the ability to pedal while on the bike, evaluate their need for training wheels, communicate a high degree of usefulness/benefits at being able to ride a bike without assistance, and report personal satisfaction and enjoyment at being able to ride a bike on their own. Learners must be familiar with what a bike is, know the basic parts of a bike such as the wheels, pedal, and handlebars, and know the different types of safety equipment used when riding a bike such as a helmet and elbow pads. Lastly, learners must have a very basic knowledge of how to balance themselves. For early childhood, I will administer a verbal survey while using visual aids before the learning task. The questions will include, who can tell me what this is? I'll show a picture of a bike. What are the names of these parts of the bike? Show different parts of bikes. And what should you wear to keep your body safe on a bike? Show pictures of a helmet and elbow pads. I will evaluate the prior knowledge of the learners as they raise their hands while I ask the questions aloud. Learners in late adulthood will be asked to answer the same questions in a written survey without visual aids. I will also give a physical assessment to both developmental groups to gauge their balance. The learners will balance on a strider bike, which is identical to a regular bike except that it has no pedals. Once seated on the strider bike, the learners will bend their knees as if there are pedals to balance in a stationary position, and push the strider bike forward and put their legs up as if there are pedals to balance while in motion. From here, I'll determine how much time and individual support each learner will need in the upcoming activities. Early childhood on day 1. For the first activity, I will start on a flat surface such as the driveway, with an appropriately sized bike with training wheels. They will pedal from one end of the driveway and back to feel comfortable pedaling. This will be repeated until they reach the mastery of pedaling while using training wheels. During the second activity, I'll remove the training wheels from the bike and move to the lawn. The learner will pedal across the grass without training wheels as the instructor grasps the handlebars to ensure balance, then pedal back across the lawn with the instructor only walking next to them to correct balance, and finally, pedaling across the lawn on their own. Each of these steps will be repeated until the learner reaches mastery before moving on. Once the learners have reviewed the second activity on day 2, they will sit at a table on the driveway with blank sheets of paper and crayons. I will ask the learner to draw a picture of how knowing how to ride a bike could be useful for them. Instructors will walk around to ensure that the learners remain on task. Day 2 will end with the fourth activity where the learners will play a game of red light, green light while on their bikes from one end of the driveway to the other. Each learner will receive a popsicle when they reach the end of the driveway. For late adulthood, on the first day for the first activity, I will start the learner off on a flat surface such as the basketball court of the public park with an appropriately sized bike with training wheels. They will pedal from one end to the other and back to feel comfortable pedaling. This will be repeated until they reach the mastery of pedaling while using training wheels. For the second learning activity, I will remove the training wheels and move to the grass area of the park. The learner will pedal across the grass without training wheels as the instructor grasps the handlebars to ensure balance, then pedal back across the grass with instructors only walking next to them to correct balance, and finally pedaling across the grass on their own. Each of these steps will be repeated until the learner reaches mastery before moving on. Once the learners have reviewed the second activity on day 2, we will sit at the picnic benches at the park and each learner will be asked to write 5 different ways that knowing how to ride a bike could be useful for them. Day 2 will end with the fourth activity where learners will take a leisurely bike ride around the park to see that biking can be a low-impact activity that will improve their health, be outdoors, and engage in social behavior. The learning activities are similar because they require both groups to practice pedaling on a flat surface and practice pedaling on grass without training wheels with the help of an instructor. Each group is required to identify how knowing how to ride a bike would be useful to them, and each learner must ride a bike on their own using knowledge from previous activities. Differences include the learning environments, the front yard for children to decrease extraneous load, and a public park for adults. Both groups are also asked to identify how riding a bike is useful to them in a way that is developmentally appropriate, either through drawing a picture or written answers. Also, early childhood plays a game with a reward, while the late adulthood group goes on a leisurely bike ride that focuses on reflection. Research support includes Activity 1, Creating Mastery Orientation Enhances Learning and Motivation. This activity creates a community where everyone supports one another's attempts to learn and helps learners see their mistakes as opportunities as the instructor reacts to the errors with interest and support, focuses on improvement, learning, and progress as they learn to pedal the bike, and there is a reasonable probability of learning to pedal successfully. Activity 2, learning and motivation are enhanced when learners set goals, monitor their performance, and evaluate their progress towards achieving their goals. Both groups identify prior knowledge, thus allowing them to set goals. They also have the opportunity to engage in peer collaboration where they can discuss their strategies and evaluate their progress. Activity 3, learning and motivation are enhanced if the learner values the task. The materials in this activity are relevant and useful to the developmental age of the learners in both groups, and the learners provide a rationale about the importance and utility value of the learning task. Activity 4, learning and motivation are enhanced when learners experience autonomy, enjoyment, and satisfaction. Both developmental groups get a sense of autonomy as they are asked to ride a bike on their own without help, and learning environments are physically and psychologically safe through an activity that is enjoyable and appropriate. Developmental appropriateness for early childhood in the first and second learning activities include rehearsal. Repeatedly pedaling the bike allows learners to use newly developed cognitive advances in executive function while their brains are still plastic and their ability to retain information is rapidly developing. These activities also operate within the learner's zone of proximal development, provides opportunities for emotion coaching by instructors, and allows them to use their gross motor skills to pedal the bike. The third learning activity provides crayons as a salient stimuli to help the learners pay attention and utilize fine motor skills. By this time, learners have also developed into the pre-operational stage where they are able to represent the world with images and drawings, such as drawing how riding a bike could be useful to them. The fourth learning activity utilizes social play and games, which are important for cognitive and social development as they allow children to interact with peers, learn to take turns, balance social roles, and engage in symbolic understanding and metacognition. The game of red light, green light allows them to practice physical skills they have just learned while also engaging in an activity that will foster cognitive and social growth. For late adulthood, the first and second learning activities help train the cognitive skills of the older adult learners. Although there is some loss of plasticity in late adulthood, implicit memory is less adversely affected than explicit memory. Riding a bike builds on skills and routine procedures such as balancing and pedaling that older adults can perform without having to consciously think about. The third learning activity utilizes socio-emotional selectivity theory. Because older adults place high value on emotional satisfaction, they often prefer to spend time with familiar individuals with whom they have rewarding relationships. This activity gives them time to reflect on how learning to ride a bike can contribute to those relationships. Activity 4 aligns with the activity theory, which states that the more active and involved older adults are, the more likely they are to be satisfied with their lives. Exercise can lead to independent lives, reduce the risk of chronic diseases, and improve cognitive functioning. It can also increase feelings of autonomy, control, and self-determination to lead to a more fulfilling lifestyle. Formative assessments will be performed during the learning task for each learning activity. During the first learning activity, instructors will ask the learners to demonstrate how they pedal on the bike by riding from one end of a flat surface to another. The instructor will observe to see if they have learned to pedal. During the second learning activity, instructors will individually interview each learner about whether they feel more comfortable riding the bike with or without training wheels. By asking individually, the learners will be able to answer more honestly without peer pressure. For the formative assessment during the third activity, early childhood will verbally communicate in a group interview setting what they drew, and late adulthood will be asked to communicate the 5 ways that riding a bike could be beneficial to them. Instructors will record responses and move on. The assessment of the fourth activity will be both formative and summative since it's the last activity. Early childhood learners will show 3 different pictures: a smiley face indicating satisfied, a face with no expression to indicate neither happy nor unsatisfied, and a frowny face to indicate unsatisfied. The learner will point to the face that shows how they feel about being able to ride a bike on their own. For late adulthood, instructors will distribute a sheet of paper with a Likert scale containing the item, "I feel satisfied and I enjoy riding a bike on my own." Instructors will record responses for a formative and summative assessment. After all activities, I will do one summative assessment for the first, second, and third learning outcomes after the final learning activity. This will be the same for both developmental groups. This will include a final test for learners that will require them to again pedal on a flat surface, verbally communicate whether they still feel that they need training wheels through an individual interview, and finally, verbally share as a group what they drew or wrote to indicate how riding a bike would be useful to them. The observations and verbal responses recorded will allow instructors to compare formative and summative assessment data to gauge whether the learners were able to reach all learning outcomes successfully. Thank you!